The night didn't begin with fear. It began with music. Low bass rolled through the quiet neighborhood, pressing against the windows of a house that wasn't meant to hold that many people. Outside, cars lined both sides of the street, parked carelessly as if no one expected consequences. It was supposed to be simple, a short-term rental, an Airbnb booking for the weekend, a place to celebrate and forget everything outside those walls. At first, everything felt controlled. Music, laughter, phones recording moments that seemed harmless. People filled the living room, voices overlapping, drinks passing from hand to hand without questions. The energy built naturally, slowly rising without anyone noticing how quickly it was getting out of control. The house stood in a quiet neighborhood where unfamiliar cars didn't go unnoticed, but that night no one stepped in. Curtains moved slightly. Lights stayed on. People watched, but stayed inside. Inside the house, more guests arrived, some invited, others not. No one checked. No one cared. If you knew someone, or said you did, you were in. The space tightened as the crowd grew. Someone opened the back door, letting the party spill into the yard. Groups formed and broke apart. Strangers became temporary friends. It felt loud, alive, and safe in a way that only chaos can feel when nothing has gone wrong yet. Near midnight, the mood shifted. Not enough for everyone to notice, but enough for a few to feel it. A glance held too long, a shoulder bump that wasn't entirely accidental. Words exchanged quietly, but with tension behind them. The kind of moment that passes quickly, but leaves something behind. The music got louder. People stopped paying attention to anything else. Phones kept recording. Someone shouted lyrics from across the room. Drinks spilled onto the floor and no one reacted. The kitchen counters were crowded, hands reaching without asking, movement becoming tighter and less controlled. Near the hallway, two people stood too close to each other. Their voices stayed low, but the tension between them was clear. It wasn't a fight yet, but it was moving in that direction. Around them, the party continued like nothing was wrong. One of them stepped forward. The other didn't move back. The distance between them disappeared. Their words sharpened, their tone changed, and suddenly the air around them felt heavier. A few people nearby noticed. Someone hesitated, unsure whether to step in or ignore it. That hesitation lasted only a moment, but it mattered. Because situations like this don't explode instantly, they build. The music dipped for a second as one track ended and another began. That brief pause made everything feel louder. Then something snapped. A push, a stumble, a glass hitting the floor and breaking. Heads turned, conversations stopped. People looked toward the hallway, trying to understand what just happened. The two figures were no longer just talking. Hands were raised, not in excitement, but in warning. Someone tried to calm it down. "Yo, chill, it's not that serious." But it was already past that point. More people gathered, pulled in by curiosity. Some tried to separate them, others just watched. Phones came out again, recording without hesitation. No one was thinking about consequences. Outside, the street stayed quiet, completely disconnected from what was happening inside. Inside, the tension spread outward. The fight wasn't contained anymore. Friends stepped in, sides formed without words. The room that felt full of energy minutes ago now felt unstable. Then someone said something that changed everything. No one outside that moment would know exactly what it was, but the reaction was immediate. Movement surged, voices rose, the first real hit landed. The crowd reacted in pieces. Some stepped back instantly, others pushed closer. A few tried to break it apart, grabbing arms, pulling people away, shouting over each other, but control was gone. The hallway became the center of everything. The fight pulled more people into it, expanding outward. The music kept playing, loud and disconnected from reality. Then, a sound cut through everything. Sharp, sudden, wrong. At first, it didn't register. It didn't match the environment. People hesitated for a split second. Then, it happened again. This time it was clear. Everything changed instantly. The music was still playing, but no one heard it anymore. People understood what that sound meant. This wasn't just a fight. panic replaced everything. Screams filled the space. People turned toward the sound, eyes wide, bodies frozen for a brief second before instinct took over. Then movement exploded in every direction. Some ran for the exits, others dropped to the ground. A few stood still, unable to process what was happening. The hallway emptied in waves as people tried to get away. Shoes slipped on spilled drinks, phones fell. Someone slammed into a wall trying to escape. Another shot echoed, louder now. There was no confusion anymore. People rushed toward the front door, pushing through it into the night. Some screamed for help, others ran without looking back. Cars that had been parked carelessly became escape routes. Engines started, doors slammed, tires screeched as people tried to leave. Inside, chaos took over completely. Voices overlapped, loud and desperate. "Call 911, dead out, where is he?" No one had clear answers. No one knew exactly what was happening, only that it was real and it was happening fast. Time felt distorted, seconds stretched, then disappeared. Movements blurred, decisions became instinct. People moved without thinking, driven by fear.
The house that felt alive minutes ago now felt dangerous. Every sound felt louder. Every movement felt urgent. The night that started with music had turned into something else entirely. Something no one expected, and something that couldn't be undone. Outside, the night air felt colder than it should have. People poured out of the house in waves, some running without direction, others stopping only when they reached the edge of the street. A few looked back, trying to understand what they had just escaped, but most didn't. Instinct pushed them forward, away from the noise, away from the house, away from something they couldn't fully process yet. Cars that had been parked in messy lines suddenly became lifelines. Doors slammed, engines turned over, headlights cut through the darkness as drivers rushed to leave. Some vehicles sped off immediately, tires screeching against the pavement. Others hesitated, blocked by the chaos, by people running across the street without looking, by confusion that hadn't settled into order yet. Across the neighborhood, lights began turning on one by one. Curtains moved again, but this time not out of curiosity. Something was wrong, and now it was impossible to ignore. The sound had carried farther than anyone inside realized. Inside the house, the atmosphere had completely transformed. What was once crowded with movement and noise now felt fractured, unstable. People were no longer dancing or talking. They were searching, shouting, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Some were still on the floor, frozen or shaken, trying to understand if they were hurt. Others moved quickly, checking rooms, calling out names, looking for friends who had disappeared in the rush toward the exits. The music had finally stopped, but the silence that replaced it felt louder than anything before. Near the hallway, the space where everything had started now looked completely different. The energy that once pulled people in had vanished. In its place was something heavier, something real, the kind of stillness that follows sudden violence. A phone lay on the ground, screen cracked, still recording. The video captured fragments, shouting, movement, then chaos. It would become important later, but in that moment, no one noticed it. Someone knelt nearby, hands shaking, trying to speak but unable to form clear words. Another person stood against the wall, staring forward, not moving, as if their mind hadn't caught up to what their eyes had seen. "Call for help," someone repeated, louder this time, trying to take control of a situation that no longer had any structure. A few people pulled out their phones, fingers fumbling as they tried to dial. Voices overlapped as multiple calls went out at once, each one describing the same event in different, incomplete ways. "There's been a shooting. I don't know how many. It just happened. People are hurt." Outside, the first siren could be heard in the distance. Faint at first, then growing louder with every passing second. It cut through the noise of engines and voices, bringing a different kind of tension. Some people slowed down when they heard it. Others moved faster, not wanting to be there when help arrived, not wanting to answer questions they weren't ready for. Inside, movement became more focused. The initial panic had shifted into something more urgent. People weren't just trying to escape anymore. They were trying to understand. Names were called out again, louder now. Some answered immediately. Others didn't. That silence carried weight. In one of the rooms, a small group had gathered, speaking quickly, trying to piece together what they had seen. Their versions didn't match exactly. One said it started in the hallway. Another thought it began near the kitchen. Someone else insisted it was outside first, that it moved inside after. The details blurred together. That's what shock does. It breaks memory into fragments. Near the entrance, the front door remained open, swinging slightly as people moved in and out. The cool air flowed inside, mixing with the heavy atmosphere, but it didn't make things feel any clearer. A few people who had run earlier slowly made their way back, drawn by concern, by the need to know what had happened to the people they left behind. They approached cautiously, stopping just outside, unsure whether to step back in or stay where they were. The sirens were closer now. Multiple vehicles, not just one. The sound echoed through the street, bouncing off houses, filling the space with urgency. Inside, someone finally took a step toward organizing what little control they could find. They started directing people away from certain areas, telling others to stay where they were. It wasn't perfect, but it created small pockets of order within the chaos. Stay here. Don't move. Help is coming. The words didn't calm anyone, but they gave structure to the moment. In the hallway, the space was nearly empty now. The crowd that once filled it had scattered, leaving behind only a few who hadn't been able to move or hadn't wanted to leave someone behind. The shift from crowded to empty made everything feel more exposed, more real. Outside, the first police vehicle turned onto the street. Its lights flashed across the houses, across the parked cars, across the faces of people still standing outside. The scene that had felt uncontrolled moments ago was about to change again. The car stopped abruptly. Doors opened, officers stepped out quickly, scanning the area, taking in the situation in seconds. People began speaking all at once. "Over there. It happened inside. There's people still in there."
The officers moved without hesitation, heading toward the house, their focus immediate and direct. The noise followed them, voices, questions, fragments of information that didn't fully connect yet. Inside, the shift was immediate. The presence of law enforcement changed the energy again. The chaos didn't disappear, but it became more contained. Movement slowed, voices lowered slightly, though the tension remained. Officers entered, quickly assessing the space, separating people, asking direct questions that didn't always have clear answers. Where did it happen? How many shots? Is the person still here? Some people answered quickly, others couldn't. A few gave conflicting information, not because they were lying, but because they didn't fully understand what they had witnessed. Outside, more emergency vehicles arrived, the street filled with flashing lights, red and blue reflecting off every surface. Neighbors stepped further outside now, no longer watching from behind curtains. The situation had moved beyond curiosity into something undeniable. Inside the house, the scene was now divided into sections. Some areas were being cleared, others were being secured. People were directed where to stand, where not to go, what to do next. Phones were still in hands, but no one was recording anymore. The focus had shifted completely. This was no longer a party, it was a crime scene. And for many of the people there, the reality was only just beginning to settle in. By the time the second wave of sirens reached the street, the night had fully transformed. What had started as scattered panic was now being pulled into structure. Police vehicles lined the road, their lights reflecting off every parked car, every window, every face still lingering outside. The energy was no longer chaotic in the same way, but it wasn't calm either. It was tense, controlled, and heavy with uncertainty. Inside the house, officers moved with purpose. They separated people into small groups, directing them away from the main areas, asking short, direct questions that demanded immediate answers. Where were you standing? What did you see? Did anyone recognize anyone involved? Most answers came out fragmented. People spoke quickly, trying to remember details that had already begun to blur. Some pointed toward the hallway, others toward the living room. A few insisted it started outside and moved in. No version matched perfectly, but each one added a piece. Near the entrance, a group stood close together, speaking in low voices, replaying the same few moments again and again. Their words overlapped, each person trying to fill in the gaps left by the others. It happened so fast, I didn't even see who. I heard it first, then everyone just started running. Shock lingered in their expressions. Some stared at the ground, others looked toward the hallway, but quickly turned away. The mind was trying to process something it wasn't ready to accept. Further inside, investigators began marking positions, quietly noting where people had been, where movement had happened, where the situation had escalated beyond control. The space no longer resembled a place meant for celebration. It had become something clinical, observed, analyzed. A phone was recovered from the floor, its screen still lit. An officer picked it up carefully, glancing at the recording that had captured the moment everything changed. It showed fragments, movement, raised voices, a sudden shift, then panic. It didn't tell the full story, but it confirmed one thing clearly. This wasn't random. Something had led to this. Outside, more individuals were being guided away from the immediate area. Some sat on the curb, heads in their hands, trying to steady their breathing. Others paced back and forth, repeating the same sentences, trying to make sense of what they had just lived through. I just got there. I didn't even know half the people inside. It was supposed to be nothing serious. Those words echoed through different voices, different tones, but carried the same meaning. No one had expected this. No one had prepared for it. Across the street, a few neighbors had gathered, standing at a distance, watching the scene unfold with a mix of disbelief and quiet understanding. The noise, the lights, the urgency, it all confirmed what they had feared when they first heard the sounds. Inside, the investigation began to take shape. Officers moved through the house room by room, clearing spaces, identifying who was still inside, making sure no immediate threat remained. Questions continued, but now they were more focused. Did anyone see where he went? Was there more than one? Did anyone recognize a face? Descriptions started forming, though none were complete. A hoodie, dark clothing, a height estimate, a direction someone thought they saw. Every detail mattered, even if it wasn't certain. Near the hallway, the space had been secured. The area where the confrontation escalated was now quiet, isolated from the rest of the house. What had been a crowded, tense environment minutes earlier was now still, marked by absence. Investigators stood just outside it, speaking in low, controlled voices, piecing together timelines. Initial conflict here, escalation within seconds. Multiple people involved, then separation. The pattern was beginning to emerge, but the missing piece remained the same. Who brought it there? Outside, a witness stepped forward, speaking more clearly than the others. Their voice was steady, but their eyes showed the same shock. "I saw him earlier," they said. "He wasn't with anyone, just watching." That detail shifted the focus slightly. Where? Near the back at first, then inside. The officers exchanged a quick look. That wasn't someone pulled into the moment, that was someone already present before it began. Inside, more phones were collected. Videos, messages, fragments of the night that would later be reviewed again and again. Every angle mattered. Every second recorded added context. In one clip, the music was still playing loudly. In another, voices were rising near the hallway. In another, people were moving quickly, reacting before the camera fully captured why. Taken together, they began to form a sequence. Not complete, but closer. Outside, the street had been partially blocked now. Additional units had arrived, creating a perimeter. The scene was no longer just about what happened inside the house. It had expanded outward, into the neighborhood, into every direction someone might have moved after leaving. A few individuals who had left earlier were being brought back, identified by others, asked to explain what they saw as they exited. Their accounts were clearer in some ways, less influenced by the center of the chaos, but still incomplete. I heard it and ran. I didn't look back. I just wanted to get out. Those reactions were expected. In moments like that, survival overrides everything else. Back inside, the question shifted again. Who organized the party? Who rented the place? Did they know everyone who was here? The answers revealed another layer. The gathering wasn't tightly controlled. It had spread through messages, through social media, through word of mouth. People had shown up without invitation, without verification. That made the crowd unpredictable, and it made identifying one person among many much harder. Near the front of the house, one officer stepped outside briefly, scanning the street, looking at the pattern of parked cars, the directions they faced, the ones that had already left. Some vehicles were gone. and with them, potential answers. The realization settled in quickly. Whoever was responsible had likely used that same chaos to disappear. Inside, the remaining individuals were now quieter. The initial shock had begun to settle into something heavier: realization. The understanding that this wasn't just a moment of chaos, it was something that would follow them long after this night ended. A few sat completely still, replaying the same seconds in their minds. Others spoke in low voices, trying to piece together details, trying to understand how something so normal had shifted so quickly. It didn't feel real. It happened too fast. No one saw it coming. But that last part wasn't entirely true. Because somewhere in that night, before everything escalated, there had been signs. Small ones, easy to ignore, easy to miss in a crowded room full of noise and movement. And now, those moments mattered. Investigators continued to move through the space, documenting everything, building a timeline that would eventually become clearer. Every step, every interaction, every second leading up to the turning point. Outside, the lights continued to flash, casting the street in alternating colors. The neighborhood that had started the night in silence was now fully awake, fully aware. And at the center of it all, one question remained unanswered. Not what happened, but who made it happen. As the night moved forward, the scene shifted from immediate response to controlled investigation. The urgency was still there, but it had changed form. What began as chaos was now being broken down into details, timelines, and decisions that would determine what happened next. Inside the house, officers continued working through each room with precision. Every space was examined, not just for what was visible, but for what could be reconstructed. Movement patterns, positions, interactions. Everything mattered now. The story of the night was no longer being told by the people who experienced it, but by the evidence they left behind. Near the hallway, investigators focused on the exact point where the escalation took place. The area had been cleared, isolated from the rest of the house. What had once been filled with noise and movement was now still, marked only by subtle traces of what had taken place. An officer stood just outside, reviewing early statements. The same pattern kept appearing. A disagreement, a shift in tone, a sudden escalation. Then the moment, everything changed. But there was still a gap.
No one could clearly identify the person who turned the situation into something irreversible. Descriptions overlapped, but didn't align perfectly. Dark clothing, average height, possibly alone, possibly not. Some were certain they had seen him earlier. Others weren't sure at all. That uncertainty created a problem. In a crowded space where people moved constantly, blending into each other, identity became difficult to fix. Faces passed by without being remembered. Conversations happened without context. And when everything collapsed, memory became unreliable. In the living room, officers began mapping out where people had been standing at different points in the night. Small groups were brought in one at a time, asked to describe their movements in sequence. Where were you before the argument? Did you see anyone enter right before it started? Who was closest when it escalated? Answers varied, but certain elements repeated. The argument had drawn attention quickly. People had moved closer, forming a loose circle. Some had tried to intervene. Others had stepped back. That circle mattered, because whoever was responsible had been inside it. A recovered video added more clarity. It showed the moment just before everything shifted. Voices raised slightly, bodies angled forward, tension building in a confined space. Then sudden movement. The frame shook as the person recording reacted. It didn't show everything, but it showed enough. Investigators paused on individual frames, analyzing positions, identifying faces, tracking movement. Someone entered the edge of the frame briefly, then disappeared as the camera shifted. That detail stood out. "Pause that," one officer said quietly. They reviewed it again. The figure wasn't interacting directly at first, just present, watching, then moving closer as the situation escalated. Not reacting, approaching. That distinction mattered. Outside, the perimeter had expanded slightly. Officers moved along the street, checking nearby areas, speaking with anyone who had remained. Some neighbors had clearer timelines than those inside the house. They had noticed when the cars began arriving, when the noise increased, when it changed from music to something else. One neighbor spoke with certainty. "I heard arguing before anything else," they said. "It wasn't loud at first, but it was different from the rest of the noise." That aligned with what others had described. Inside, another witness came forward with a more specific memory. He wasn't part of the group, they said. He was just there, watching, like he was waiting. The wording was simple, but the implication was not. Waiting for what? Investigators noted it carefully. Back inside, attention returned to the collected phones. More videos were reviewed, each one capturing a slightly different angle, a different moment, a different piece of the timeline. None of them told the full story on their own, but together they began to connect. In one clip, the figure appeared again, partially obscured, standing near the edge of the group before the argument intensified. In another, he moved closer, positioning himself just behind the main interaction. Not intervening, not leaving, staying. That behavior separated him from the rest. Most people reacted to the tension. They stepped in, stepped back, or moved away entirely. He did none of those things. He stayed focused. That detail narrowed the field. Outside, officers began identifying vehicles that had left quickly after the incident. Witnesses pointed out specific cars, recalling who had been near them earlier in the night. Some descriptions overlapped with those given inside. A dark vehicle, parked slightly away from the main cluster, left immediately after the sound. No hesitation, no delay. That suggested preparation. Inside, the timeline became more precise. Arrival patterns were reconstructed, early guests, later arrivals, those who came in waves. The unknown figure appeared to have arrived somewhere in the middle, not among the first, not among the last. That placed him inside the most crowded window of the night, the point where control was already weakening. An officer reviewed the sequence again, speaking quietly but clearly. He enters after the peak begins, stays on the edges, moves in only when the conflict escalates.
Another officer nodded. Not random. That conclusion shifted the direction of the investigation. This wasn't someone caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was someone who chose the moment. Back in the hallway, measurements were taken, distances marked, positions confirmed. The physical layout helped explain how quickly things unfolded. Tight space, limited visibility, high noise level. Everything worked against control, and everything worked in favor of someone who understood how to move within it. Outside, the street had settled into a controlled scene. Fewer people remained now. Those who had nothing more to add had been allowed to leave. Those who stayed were either directly involved or still being questioned. The flashing lights continued, but the movement had slowed. The initial surge of urgency had transitioned into steady, methodical work. Inside, one final detail began to stand out. Timing. The moment the argument escalated and the moment everything changed were almost immediate, too close to be coincidence. That suggested awareness, anticipation. The unknown figure hadn't just been present, he had been ready. Investigators looked at each other briefly, the implications settling in without needing to be spoken out loud. The night hadn't spiraled out of control on its phone. Someone had been waiting for it to. By the time the early hours of the morning approached, the investigation had moved beyond the immediate scene and into something more deliberate. The chaos of the night was now being translated into structure, statements, timelines, digital traces, and patterns that would either connect or contradict everything people believed they saw. Inside the house, fewer people remained. Those still there had been identified as critical witnesses, individuals whose positions, movements, or observations placed them closer to the center of what happened. The rest had been released, sent home with instructions they barely processed, their minds still replaying fragments of the same moment. The environment itself had changed again. It no longer felt like a place where something had just happened. It felt like a place being studied, every corner holding information, every surface part of a larger reconstruction. Investigators gathered in a small section near the front, reviewing what they had collected so far. Videos, statements, timestamps. Each piece alone was incomplete,
but together they were beginning to form something clearer. The sequence was tightening. Arrival, build-up, tension, escalation, then the turning point. But the identity behind that turning point still remained uncertain. A digital team began organizing the footage recovered from multiple phones. Clips were aligned by time, synced as closely as possible to create a continuous view of the night from different perspectives. Screens showed overlapping angles, each one filling gaps left by the others. In one sequence, the argument began to take shape. The body language shifted before the words became visible. A step forward, a refusal to step back, the formation of a loose circle as attention drew inward. Then, in a narrow gap between two people, the same figure appeared again. Partially visible, consistent positioning, close but not involved. "Freeze that," one investigator said. They zoomed in. The image wasn't perfect, but certain details held. Height range, clothing outline, movement pattern. The figure leaned slightly forward, not reacting to the argument itself, but tracking it, watching. Another clip confirmed the same behavior from a different angle. The figure adjusted position as others shifted, maintaining proximity without drawing attention. That wasn't passive. That was intentional. Outside, officers had begun tracing vehicle movement more precisely. License plates from nearby cameras were being reviewed. Traffic patterns on surrounding streets were analyzed to identify which vehicles left immediately and which remained. One pattern stood out quickly. A car that had not been parked directly near the house, but slightly down the street. It arrived after the crowd had already formed. It left within seconds of the incident. No hesitation, no delay. That detail aligned with witness descriptions. Inside, the timeline continued to narrow.
The argument itself lasted less than a minute before escalating. The transition from verbal to physical was sudden, but not entirely unpredictable. What followed, however, happened almost instantly after that shift. Too quickly for someone unprepared. Investigators returned to the video sequence again, this time focusing on micro-movements, small shifts that might have gone unnoticed in real time. The figure's posture changed just before the escalation reached its peak. A slight adjustment, a repositioning that placed them closer with a clearer path. Not reacting, preparing. "Run it again," someone said. They watched in silence. The pattern repeated exactly. That removed doubt. Inside the room, the tone shifted. What had been uncertain before now carried direction. This was no longer about identifying someone who got caught in the moment. This was about identifying someone who anticipated it. Outside, another witness added a crucial piece. "I remember that car," they said. "It didn't park with everyone else. It stayed a little away, like they didn't want to be seen with the crowd." That detail reinforced what the data was already suggesting: separation, intentional distance, an exit plan. Back inside, investigators began building a profile based on behavior rather than identity. The person they were looking for wasn't just someone present at the scene. It was someone who moved differently from everyone else. Arrived mid-event, stayed on the edges, observed rather than engaged, moved in only at the critical moment, left immediately after. Each point reduced randomness. Each point increased intention. The house itself provided another layer of clarity. The layout showed how limited visibility would have been in certain areas, how sound would have echoed, how movement would have been partially obscured. For most people, that environment created confusion. For one person, it created opportunity. Near the hallway, final measurements were completed. Distances between positions, angles of movement, potential lines of sight. Everything confirmed how quickly the moment unfolded and how difficult it would have been for anyone to fully understand it while it was happening, except for someone who wasn't reacting, someone who was already focused. Outside, the investigation expanded beyond the immediate block. Nearby intersections, traffic cameras, and surrounding streets were now part of the search. The vehicle identified earlier became a priority. Timestamps narrowed the window. Direction of travel became clearer. Each piece moved the investigation forward. Inside, the final remaining witnesses were being asked one more set of questions, not about what happened, but about what felt different before it did. Did anything seem off?
Did anyone stand out before the argument started? Most hesitated. Memory under stress often protects itself by focusing only on the most intense moments. But one answer came back consistent. There was someone who didn't fit, a witness said. Everyone else was either talking, moving, or reacting. He wasn't. He just watched. That observation aligned with everything the evidence was showing. The difference between being part of a moment and being outside of it. That difference defined everything. As the first signs of morning approached, the scene was no longer active in the same way. The immediate urgency had passed, replaced by steady progression. What happened inside that house had already been set. Now it was about proving it. Investigators stepped back from the gathered screens, the reconstructed timeline playing silently in front of them. From multiple angles, the same story unfolded. Not perfectly clear, not fully complete, but no longer random.
The night hadn't just turned violent. It had been guided there. And somewhere beyond the flashing lights, beyond the secured perimeter, the person responsible was already gone, moving further away with every passing minute, leaving behind only fragments that were now starting to come together. As the first light of morning began to fade into the edges of the sky, the investigation shifted from reconstruction to pursuit. What had been fragments of confusion hours earlier had now formed into direction. Not complete certainty, but enough to move forward with purpose. Inside the temporary command setup, the reconstructed timeline played again across multiple screens. Every angle, every second, every movement had been aligned as closely as possible. The same figure appeared again and again, never at the center, never part of the interaction, but always present at the edge of it. Watching, waiting, moving only when it mattered. That behavior separated him from everyone else who had been inside that house. An officer leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the frame where the figure adjusted position just before everything changed. He knew, the officer said quietly. No one disagreed. Outside, the search had already expanded beyond the immediate neighborhood. The vehicle identified earlier was now the primary lead. Traffic cameras from surrounding streets were being reviewed in sequence, tracking movement outward from the scene. Timestamps narrowed the path, a dark vehicle turning left at one intersection, then passing through another camera point less than a minute later. Consistent speed, no sudden changes. That suggested control. The vehicle didn't flee in panic, it left with intention. Inside, investigators matched the estimated time of departure with the moment captured in the final sequence of videos. The alignment was nearly exact. That removed any remaining doubt. The person they were looking for had not only been inside the house, he had left immediately after. A name didn't exist yet, but a pattern did, and patterns lead to identity. Hours passed, but the pace of the investigation didn't slow. Databases were checked, vehicle registrations within a defined radius were filtered, matches were cross-referenced with known individuals connected, even loosely, to anyone who had attended the gathering. One result surfaced faster than the others, not because it was obvious, but because it fit too well. A vehicle matching the description, registered nearby but not directly connected to the property. No immediate link to the host, but indirect connections through social circles began to appear when communication histories were reviewed. Messages, mentions, a name that had come up before the night of the party, but not in a way that stood out at the time. Now it did. Investigators pulled everything they had on that individual. Not a long history, not someone widely known, but there were details that aligned with behavior seen in the footage. Detached, observant, present, but not engaged. Inside the room, the tone shifted again. What had been a search was now narrowing into confirmation. "Bring up the last frame again," one investigator said. The image appeared. The figure, partially turned, just enough to reveal a side profile. Not clear, but enough when compared carefully. Another image was placed beside it, a known photo. Not perfect, but close. Close enough that silence filled the room for a moment, then a quiet acknowledgement. That's him. Outside, units were already moving. The identified address was not far, but distance didn't matter anymore.
time did. Every minute increased the chance of disappearance, of distance, of losing the only clear lead they had. The approach was controlled, no urgency that could be seen from the outside, no signals that would warn anyone inside.
Just movement, precise, deliberate. At the location, everything appeared still, no visible activity, no immediate signs of movement. The vehicle was there, parked in a position that matched the earlier descriptions. That confirmed it. Officers positioned themselves, communicating quietly, aligning timing. Then the approach. Knock. No response. A second attempt, louder. Still nothing. A brief pause. Then entry. Inside, the space was quiet. No signs of disturbance, no attempt to leave quickly. That absence of urgency stood out immediately. Room by room, they moved through the space. Then, in one of the rooms, they found him. Not hiding, not running, just there, sitting still, as if the night had not unfolded the way it had for everyone else. For a moment, neither side spoke. Then the distance closed. Commands given. Compliance followed. No resistance. That, more than anything, left an impression. Outside, as he was brought out, the early morning light revealed a face that hours earlier had been just a fragment in a blurred frame. Now it was clear, defined, real. Inside the investigation, everything moved quickly after that. Interviews, verification, evidence alignment. The videos, the timeline, the vehicle, the behavior, all of it pointed in the same direction. But one question remained. Why? The answer didn't come immediately. At first, it came in fragments, inconsistencies, pauses between responses. But gradually, a picture formed. The night hadn't been random for him. He had known about the gathering. He had chosen to go. Not to be part of it, but to be near it. The argument had not involved him directly, but it had created the moment he had been waiting for. A shift in attention, a collapse of structure, a space where action could happen without immediate clarity. He hadn't created the conflict, he had used it. That distinction mattered. Inside the room, as the final pieces were laid out, the full weight of the night settled into something concrete. What had felt like chaos to everyone inside the house had not been chaos to him. It had been opportunity. The house, the crowd, the noise, the movement, all of it had created the perfect environment for something calculated to happen and then disappear into confusion. But it didn't disappear, because fragments remain. And when those fragments are aligned carefully enough, they tell a story that can't be ignored. By the time the sun fully rose, the scene from the night before no longer existed in the same way. The house was empty. The street was quiet again. The noise had been replaced by silence. But what happened there didn't stay there. For those who were inside, it became something they would carry forward, replaying moments they wished they had seen more clearly. For investigators, it became a case defined not by randomness, but by timing and behavior. And for one person, it became the end of a night that had been planned to disappear into memory, but instead had been reconstructed piece by piece until nothing was left hidden. The music was long gone, the crowd had vanished, but the story remained. Not as chaos, but as something understood.